Really, really great response to the session. There seems to be a lot of interest, but I know a lot of people also will be hoping to catch the recording. Okay, well, I think we'll get started, and likely going to have a few more folks join us as we move along. So since it is probably going to be a decent sized group, we're not going to do go around and do full introductions, but really welcome people to introduce yourself in the chat. Please feel free to put your name. If you're affiliated with a particular school, the pronouns that you use, and we can at least get a sense of who's with us here on the session. So again, thank you so much for joining us here today for this session on why farm to school now, using school gardens and outdoor spaces for safe and engaging learning. We're really excited to have you with us today, and we've got some great speakers with us as well. My name is Simca Horwitz. I'm the co-director at Massachusetts Farm to School, and I'm also joined by Lisa Damon, my co-director, who's going to be also helping with a bit of today's session. And I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so we can jump into things. Just one second. Great. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm really going to be focusing today on the use of school gardens and outdoor spaces as we all think about welcoming back our student populations this fall. So in today's session, we are going to briefly go over some of the real value of school gardens and outdoor learning as core to farm to school practices, and then get to hear from two great examples, the Ipswich and Northampton Public Schools, who have really well established school garden programs. We'll have a chance to dive into the really unique opportunity there is right now for some funding to support these types of programs, and also just mention some additional resources and learning opportunities that you may be interested in as you pursue these types of programs. And so actually, I'm going to turn it over to Lisa just to launch a quick poll to get a sense of who we have with us here today. And as this is just a two-question poll. So as she launches it, I'm also going to just give you a really quick background on Mass Farm to School. I know some of you may be really familiar with our organization, and for others, this could be the first time that you're participating in one of our webinars or really engaging with us. So we strengthen local farms and fisheries and promote healthy communities by increasing local food purchasing and education in schools. There's a variety of ways we do that, from providing professional learning opportunities like this session, or in other times, a lot more in-person, hands-on learning opportunities. We provide networking for farm to school practitioners, lead advocacy efforts to support more farm to school activity in more communities across the state, and also various communications programs. You may have seen our Harvest of the Month program in your cafeteria. That's what all these different fruit and vegetable posters are to the on the right side of the screen. We're really excited. This was a program that started a few years ago with a real focus on the cafeteria environment. And this year we'll be launching a whole set of resources really focused on the classroom. Standards aligned curriculum for particularly the elementary level that really provide a wide variety of opportunities for students to engage with food and farming topics. Lisa, how's the poll? Yeah? You want to share some results?
I shared it. Can you not see it?
Oh, sorry. I think because I'm still sharing my slideshow, I don't see it, but go for it. You want to summarize it?
Yeah, so we had about 45% today, or 13 folks are school administrators, 4 school-based ed folks, 4 nutrition staff, community partners, and then 6 others. So a great turnout all around. And then how often do you use outdoor spaces? Not at all, with 17%, occasionally 45%, and frequently 38%.
Great. Real mix, thanks for that. So today's focus is really going to be on that more kind of educational side of farm to school. And as I mentioned, we do also do a lot of work with school nutrition professionals. So great to hear some of you are also on this session today. And we will be providing a lot more professional development opportunities this fall, a little bit more geared towards that school nutrition audience. So if that's something you're interested in, please keep an eye out. So really briefly, before we turn it over to those who are really leading this work on the ground, I just want to provide a little bit of the background on, why we think school gardens and outdoor learning are so valuable, and really thinking about kind of how we're bringing an equity lens to our school reopening this fall, recognizing the disproportionate impacts that COVID-19 has had on some communities in Massachusetts, and the supports that those students are really going to need to thrive in school, including a really strong emphasis on social and emotional learning. And we think that, expanded access to school gardens and outdoor learning can be an important part of this work. So that's one of the things that's really clear in the fairly extensive research about school gardens and outdoor learning is the benefits, not just for academic success, but really providing opportunities for students to thrive in other ways. So we have healthy kids, engaged learners, resilient, empowered youth, and also students becoming real environmental stewards. And using the outdoors as a context for learning all across the curriculum is proven to enhance critical thinking, collaboration, leadership skills, and as I said, really that focus on social and emotional learning with the opportunity for really differentiated instruction, project-based learning, and providing more space for student voice and choice, which are really so essential for helping students develop a sense of agency and confidence, and really critically important as they are coming back to school this fall. So if you're interested in kind of diving more into the literature on this, provided a couple links in the slides, and we will be sharing out the slideshow. But I really want to make sure we have time to turn it over to those who are doing this work in practice. So first, I'm really excited to welcome Sheila McAdams, who was the principal at the Winthrop School in Ipswich. Sheila was born to a long line of dairy farmers. Childhood adventures revolved around the barn, fields, and forests of a dairy farm in upstate New York. Sheila graduated from Hamilton College with a bachelor's in psychology and landed post-college in Boston, teaching urban youth for several years while acquiring her master's in education. Teaching marine science to North Shore teachers led to teaching in Ipswich, where Sheila taught intermediate elementary students at the Winthrop School for 18 years before becoming the principal there. She's been honored to have been the principal for 14 years, during which time she's seen and been encouraged by the Farm to School initiatives that were embedded in her early schooling experience. So I'm going to turn it over to Sheila, and I will stop sharing my screen. And Sheila, I think that you should be able to share yours as well. Let's see if I can stop mine. Okay. Is it letting you?
Yes, it is.
Great.
Thank you very much. So thank you, Simca, for inviting me to take part in this today. I think that I was really excited about the opportunity and so glad that the word continues to get out. As Simca mentioned, I work in Ipswich. And so when we think about Ipswich, we often think about kind of this coastal, suburban, almost rural community with important identifying geographical features. And it does have that. It has Cranes Beach and the Great Marsh and large tracts of agricultural land. More than 50% of the land is protected by town, state, and nonprofit organizations. And they started an open space program in 1994, which allows them to purchase some land that becomes available to try to keep that resource open and available for lots of uses, some of which, of course, are farms. And there are definitely some farming opportunities there. Appleton Farms is there, now a trustee's property, and it's the oldest working farm in America. There's a variety of nonprofit and for-profit farms and organizations. So you'd think it'd be very easy to have a school garden up as part of that culture. But I'm sure, as all of us can attest, there are unique challenges for every situation and every school that we are in. The town of Ipswich has approximately 4,700 people, but the population is growing. They're experiencing a bit of a housing boom. However, less than 15% of the households have school children. So the Winthrop School is located in downtown. We're a pre-K through 5 school of about 355 students. We receive Title I funding. Because in part, we are located in a very dense clustered housing, and we also, our enrollment area serves students that are in public housing that are located in Ipswich. So we're the downtown school of the 4 schools that are in Ipswich. And while our diversity is not necessarily in race or ethnicity, it is definitely within the context of advantages. We have approximately 23.7% of our families students are at or below the poverty line. We have quite a number of food vulnerable families that's not reflected in that. And the flip side of that, of course, is that we've got wealthy families as well. So in the end, Ipswich is really a story about contrasts. The benefit of open space and the open space program is really terrific. They have these open access and easy access to a wide variety of these wonderful resources. However, prioritizing that open space has meant clustered housing, particularly near the commuter rail line, which is located downtown. It does limit the availability of families with school-age children to buy houses in the area. And there is definitely inequitable access to resources. There's no in-town transportation, and the median income difference between the folks that live in town in that downtown area and out of town is about $20,000 in their median average salaries. So there is a substantial number of parents and students, families that we recognize are very vulnerable. And all of that leads to what made gardens a priority for us. So in our population, we are well aware that we've got students with a very limited access and knowledge about growing one's own food, where that comes from. Access to healthy food is restricted for some families, particularly in our area. The food pantry is located in town. We get a lot of support from Open Door. However, it is located in the housing area and not necessarily centrally located for all families. And we wanted to improve our own access to healthy foods for our cafeterias, with the idea that, you know, if students and children know it and love it as children, they treasure it and will lead to healthy choices as they grow older. So we had some very serious priorities about 8 years ago when we were really looking at gardens. However, within all of that, we have limited space for our gardens. So our playground is the backyard of many, many families in the area for many students, which means that first of all, we don't have a lot of space. We're pretty landlocked there. And secondly, there's a lot of foot traffic. There's not a lot of places for teens to go. So we keep vandalism in mind. But the fact that there's a lot of activity in that area actually has led to some of the ways that we use that garden. We also have some boxes out front. They get used a little bit differently, but it's the same kind of idea that they're at least visible and we can manage it a little bit better. So I will give you a couple of tips along the way, and I would strongly say that each year takes on a different flavor. So we started out with a big ambition of we're going to have this program and it's always going to work the same way, and every kid will get their hands in the garden and, you know, it'll be magical and wonderful and won't it be great? And it was just too overwhelming when we first got started. And we learned really quickly to start with the staff that are interested and passionate, and they don't have to be your classroom teachers. Classroom teachers often feel a little overwhelmed with all that they have to do, but there are support staff and there are teaching staff and there are administrators or people on board who, and parents, quite frankly, who are very actively passionate about gardening. So I would strongly suggest you start with that. I did have COVID presented great opportunities actually for us to change up the way we were using our beds. In this past year, we had pre-K through K that was in 4 out of 5 days of the week for our schools. We had a hybrid model for grades 3 through 5. However, which left us with small classes of 12 to 14. However, we also utilized our gym and other spaces to bring in the majority of our kids. So 2/3 of our kids were in all 4 days. And Lisa Friedman is a person that I've interviewed for this. And she's a 4th grade teaching assistant who's been in our school for quite some time. She has a passion for gardening, and she's going to speak to us a little bit about how their classroom utilized the gardens this year.
We're trying to find a way during COVID to set up something that would be outside, so we could get the kids outside and get them to continue to be socially distant and give them a mask break, as the case may be. And so we actually set up the garden as a workshop model, and we did have the beds out back, and we thought this would be a perfect opportunity to not only sort of extend our sort of science curriculum and a little bit of math and sort of build in some outside learning time for the students. And so we set it up as a workshop model, and the garden was one of the stations within that model. And so that everyone in the classroom, it's a class of 18, got a chance at one point or another to work that station. And this was from ground up. This was from turning over the soil. This was from raking it out and grading it, to finding the seeds and planting them, to weeding, to watering. So the whole 9 yards. And the kids were exposed to that. And it accomplished all those things. It got them outside and they seemed to really enjoy it. We're trying.
So this is a really packed slide, but I'll just say, as a former teacher and a very active educator as a principal, any teacher worth their weight is going to be able to make those curricular connections. So I just slapped together, looking at the guiding principles so quickly, you can find areas where the connections to the gardens and use of outside spaces and venues are just waiting to be picked up and placed in the hands of educators. And kids are clamoring for this kind of activity. We certainly embraced our New Englander traditions, and we're outside every day with kids this past year with COVID in all kinds of weather. And the joy that they found there was just unbelievable. And I'll speak to a little bit about that social emotional piece as we go on, but clearly it's pretty easy to make these curricular connections. And I asked Lisa to speak a little bit about that.
Right, so we had a couple of examples of what we sort of embedded in there for something as simple as math. We were doing measuring, and we were working with measurement and units of measure. And so, you know, we had to figure out how long the rows were. We had to measure the distance in between the plants in that row, and so how many plants could fit in that row. So we did a little bit of extension, math extension there. We had to figure out how deep the seeds were going to be planted, and we did fractions, and we were doing fractions inside, so there was a connection there with math. We embedded a few science lessons. We were doing all kinds of sort of adaptations and what is it about the plants that could adapt them to growing in this particular soil. Everything from the energy story in photosynthesis to the shape of the leaves and the structure and what role the leaves played in how that plant could grow and succeed. To the environment. You know, if we can take care of the earth, then the earth can take care of us. And not only the health of the soil, but the health of you as a person, as a student, you know, sort of the nutrition aspect of it, that you knew exactly what you were putting in your body because you grew it. You grew it from seed. And so those were a few of the extensions that we had in there. Just trying to think of some others, but those were just a few that come to mind right off the top. Right.
So one of the things that I mentioned earlier was it was important for us to use our gardens for food access, particularly for the folks that live in the area. So, you know, we started out thinking the hard piece about gardening with kids in New England is getting a product, right? And so I know that Backyard Growers is on this call, and they've got a great system and a great plan to allow that to happen. But it was too much for us to manage when we were trying to do that as a school. So in our particular, without their help, I would add, with their help, I'm sure it would have been great. So in our particular use case, we felt it was important we got some early vegetables, but we knew the majority was going to happen in the summer. So our summer harvest was really in the front of our minds when we came to plant selection. We specifically were sensitive to what families in the area would use, squashes, tomatillos, tomatoes, and knowing that foot traffic could be a benefit then and the access to that for the folks that lived downtown and couldn't get to the pantry. Out front, there's a whole different approach. So in the boxes out front, they're used by the younger children. They tend to be smaller and easier to access. And within one of those grade levels, they obviously have forever explored butterflies and that whole science component of that. So they decided to take a couple of boxes and do some experimenting with planting different items that could create a butterfly habitat and a microcosm. So they go out there and they watch that. They watch how the butterflies will access the plants that are available, do their own little data charts with that. They also, one class had one grade level has a 100-day project. And so some child brought in seeds. So they took the opportunity to plant all 100 of those seeds. And they did a little analysis about what grew and what didn't grow and what might grow and what it might look like. And then one year they were working on garlic because it got a quick response and quick turn and then comes back the next year. And they were really doing experiments about how to grow the biggest garlic. And we used that garlic all year long. So I would say that my second tip is to really use what allow the interests of the students and the teachers and the curriculum to drive what your gardens are being used for. And then I'll just speak to what it does for kids here. So student empowerment is so underutilized, I think, in our schools. And they come in curious and they come in wanting to be active, and we train them to sit and be quiet. And I can't stress enough how poorly we do on that. And what we notice when we get outside and we start to flex and teach in a way that is not traditional, all of these social emotional learning elements come into play. Working together for a purpose that's a greater good, designing and deciding, making decisions, and really dealing with those challenges and successes feels a whole lot different than the long drawn out approach of learning to read. So a couple of things I'll add. COVID was actually a blessing. You know, there's always a silver lining to things. And for us, it was a blessing. It released us and allowed us to think outside the box. So all of a sudden we were trying to think about where can we take kids outside? We've got 12 to 14 kids in a class, you know, how can we move them about? What venues are available to us? And the community was phenomenal. So the CODA van was not being used, the Council of Aging van, because they weren't taking anyone anywhere. So we high-hosed that van and we took kids to Appleton Farms. We worked with their farm educator over there. We walked kids over to a local farm that had sheep to talk about some animal husbandry there. And a lot of our farms, they start seedlings and they have them to give you because they have extra. So I would just encourage, you're not going it alone in all of these cases. Lead with joy is what I have to end with. You know, a joyful experience will make sure that you'll continue to be successful in what you've got going on there.
Thank you so much, Sheila. Really inspiring example. And we are going to have time for Q&A at the end. So if, as Sheila or now Sarah are talking, some questions are coming up for you, please feel free to put those in the chat, and I think we'll have time to have some of that discussion at the end. But at this time, I'm going to turn it over to, excuse me, to Sarah Madden. Sarah has worked in public schools for 34 years. She graduated from Mount Holyoke College in 1987 and taught for 21 years at the Williamstown Elementary School before becoming a principal in the Berkshires for 5 years and then accepting her current position as principal at Ryan Road School in Northampton. She loves schools and enjoys the joys and challenges of leading a learning community. It's her hope to continually bring positive change to the school and to nurture and foster the many ideal educational experiences that already exist, like school gardening. So I will open up your presentation and just do, okay. Whoop, sorry. And share my screen. Sorry, just a second. Great. Okay, go for it, Sarah, and I'll try and keep up with advancing, but if I fall behind, please let me know. And actually, and just, there you go.
And I think we'll probably go a little more quickly than I don't have interviews and things, Sheila. That was, thank you. So I am Sarah Madden, principal of R.K. Finn Ryan Road School in Florence, Massachusetts, which is part of the Northampton Public Schools in Western Massachusetts. And so we are considered, it's a small city, but we are more rural, you know, so I think that the the value of outdoor education is something that is embedded in our community, which certainly makes school gardening a lot easier for everybody to grab onto and get excited about, teachers and families both. And so I've got all my photos are of actual people doing gardening at our school. And I guess, I said I'll read it, but our goals are that every student will explore, investigate, and care for the outdoors, learn in a stimulating and beautiful environment, enjoy healthy snacks that they've grown and harvested, and receive a foundation for making positive decisions regarding their health and environmental stewardship throughout their lives. And so we want to plant the seeds, not just in the garden, but plant the seeds for these kids to be stewards of the environment and to think about what they're doing and how they want to spend their time and what they're eating and where it comes from. And it's been a really wonderful way to facilitate that learning. In our outdoor classrooms, teachers, we call them this, sometimes we call it the garden and sometimes we call it the outdoor classroom. Teachers and garden educators lead lessons and investigations in a variety of curricular areas. In science, there's organisms and soil analysis, habitat, life cycle of plants and animals, nutrition, food chains, seasonal changes, environmental issues, and in social studies, Native American traditions and colonial customs, community building and service learning, and the economics of services and products. Mathematics, there's certainly counting and sorting, shapes and patterns, estimating and measuring, and data collection. And literacy, often there's stories and poetry writing out in the garden, which is really wonderful. We share read alouds that have to do with gardening and why people garden. So it's certainly a learning space. So this is our garden at the beginning. So luckily we are blessed with a huge playground. As you can see, we have a lot of green space, which is really nice. What we don't have are a lot of walkers. We have some walkers, but we didn't have the garden for sort of summer eating. I have very, I'm here all summer, but I have very few visitors to the garden in the summer. I mean, some people come and say, oh, can I get the raspberries? And I always say, yes, anything that's out there, and I put it in my end of the year communication, but it's not frequented in the summer very often. And so that's something that we've had to think about in terms of our planting and harvesting, that if we have a lot of things that come in the summer, they're not going to be used. And so that's been an adjustment, but you'll see that the kids really did the planning and drawing out and measuring and building of the beds. And before we had anything, one teacher did all this knitting. Before we had flowers, she made the flowers to put on the fence to sort of show what was to come. And we work with School Sprouts, which is a group of garden educators, and Hope Gardenaire, which is kind of funny that her name is that, but she's been wonderful. But without that connection, without that piece of having garden educators to work with, I don't think our garden would be as successful. And so that's something to think about. If there, certainly you could get in touch with her and her organization, but it's been hugely helpful, and they work with all 4 elementary schools in Northampton. And as we, it was first just the fencing and the garden beds, and then we expanded. And these are our beautiful picnic tables, and there's provide shade right next to the garden. And then we got a garden shed, and the gazebo. And so now classes usually start in the gazebo in terms of a lesson, and then work their way to the garden. The kids painted the shed. And so it's really sort of the whole area has expanded, which is really nice. And you can see the morning glories growing too, which is fun. So we did work with School Sprouts, the garden educators, and they pretty much lead the lessons, which I think made it a lot easier when I sort of brought up the idea of a school garden at school, that the teachers weren't having to create the lessons. And so I think that made it a lot more manageable. The teachers work with Hope, so it is a co-teaching setup, but it really is Hope that is planning the lessons, and the teachers facilitate and support her in that. So classes work in the garden 3 times in the fall, 4 times in the spring, and I create that schedule, but it's very predictable, so teachers know when they're taking their classes outside. Hope communicates with the teachers about what's going on, and so that has worked out really well. There's 1 day per week, and so it's not a surprise. Certainly classes go out there at other times with their teacher, but the garden times are scheduled and predictable, and that has helped with our consistency. So it's not teachers saying, well, I want to get out there, or, I meant to do that, but oh boy, the whole spring went by and it was just so busy. It's sort of the schedule's locked in, which is, I think, good for making sure we're all sticking with it. And so the garden does become a really important learning environment. They often at recess will be in the garden. Sometimes they're drawing or picking raspberries. The flowers make it, beautiful. It's not just food that we're growing, but we are trying to make it a beautiful sort of learning environment. And it is sort of central to our playground. And so at recess, kids are always around the garden. So it's very much a focal point of our playground and our outdoor space. So this was very exciting. We also have, we had a harvest celebration. So we've had one, because then we had COVID the next year. So I'm hoping to do this again, but we partner with School Sprouts, but we also partner with Grow Food Northampton. And they do a wonderful education program in classrooms. They deliver hands-on cooking, nutrition discovery, education around garden and farming. And so we had a big harvest day. So I worked with Hope and Grow Food Northampton to have, this wonderful harvest celebration. And it was really great. So in November, it was cold, but it was beautiful. See, it's a blue sky day. It was really wonderful. We had, we did pop, our own corn that we were popping. So we had different stations, and Grow Food Northampton brought some additional vegetables to make sure that everybody had healthy eating during the celebration. And it was fabulous. And we were out there for not too long. And so I think that was a key too. Classes came out and they went to each station for about 10 minutes, and it really felt celebratory, and not, there was something for everybody to be doing at every moment. And so it wasn't like there was just sort of running around the garden, it was a very focused harvest celebration, but it was really wonderful. And I'm hoping that we'll be able to do that again. And during COVID, these are, so we didn't have as many students as I would have liked, but we used it all the time during COVID times. And so Hope really focused on the potatoes during that time and building some new beds outside the fence. But it was, in some ways, it was really nice because more kids had, more opportunities for hands-on learning. And often it was students who needed that probably more than others, and the students who were in the building. And so it really provided some very sort of smaller group work in the garden than we normally have. We usually have a whole class of almost 20 in the garden at a time. And so this is, I can read this, but using the outdoors as a classroom is an innovative approach to teaching and learning that is hands-on, multisensory, and curriculum integrated. It is particularly important now when children often have fewer opportunities to connect with nature and experience the outdoors. So frequent guided experience with the garden allow children to develop a sense of familiarity and connectedness with the natural world. These experiences promote inquiry, critical thinking skills, and the development of lifelong habits of responsible use of the environment and natural resources. Such skills and habits will help our students become socially responsible citizens. And we tried, when you learn from your mistakes, we thought we were putting down a surface in between our beds that was going to be really great for wheelchairs, and it didn't turn out to be so great. It was this stone, it was very difficult to navigate, and then weeds grew up in it, so we could do it, but it was difficult. And so we did put some raised beds outside the garden. Now we have 3 actually, and that was really wonderful to be able, because we had 3 students who are in wheelchairs. And so that was a really nice addition, even though this particular student didn't love the dirt, but he still did it, but he's no, thank you. So come on, we just got this bed. Anyway, and I think just all the little conversations that happen during the gardening, I think really do increase the social emotional health and well-being of students, touching living things, thinking differently. I just feel like when you're in the garden, there's a celebration, and for all kids, that's just really important. It does bring joy to your day when you're growing things and touching growing things and picking and eating. It's just really, it feels so basic to to creating joy in students. So I have to share this. We haven't even dealt with it, but this is a very recent email that I just received from our one of our fifth grade teachers. And so I just love that he's thinking about this. I was thinking to focus on composter designs and experiment with different types of composters in the fall, then do work with producers, consumers, and decomposers. Not sure how it will happen yet. For the spring, try to focus on photosynthesis and check the standards for anything else. Experiment with photosynthesis for a part, for sure. So he's thinking about how he wants to better target learning through the garden experience. And I'm glad that he's thinking about that. So he'll be working with Hope in terms of how they can make this happen. So it's not just driven by School Sprouts, but coordinated and collaborated with Hope. And these are some of the ongoing challenges. Certainly summer maintenance. We try to get families to sign up to water or weed. We've had limited success with that. Some years have been better than others. We haven't had to water much this summer, so that sort of helped a little bit. But also financial support is always a challenge. It originated with grant funding through our Northampton Education Foundation to sort of get us rolling, but they really don't want to sustain a program. They really want to bring up innovative ideas and then have the school, sort of maintain them. And so maintaining the garden has been, it is tricky because it does require a lot of financial support. And so we're committed to that, but it also then takes away from other things. And so it's always a balancing act. And then the long range planning and coordination between the school and the garden educator. I think that there's some teachers who do that a little bit better and more regularly. And so then we've been trying to have a school coordinator, to sort of, so that I don't have to be the garden coordinator. And that's worked okay, but I feel like we can do a better job sort of spearheading the long-term goals of the garden. I think are sort of where I can't be the garden coordinator, but up to now I've sort of been the garden coordinator with working with School Sprouts, of course. So. But overall, I want to do everything I can as a school leader to support and nurture this important work. So if I have to keep being the garden coordinator, I'll do it.
Great. Thank you so much, Sarah. Another great example of how gardens are being integrated into really the full school day. So I'm going to, before we open it up for Q&A, and I did have a question about whether we're going to be sharing out slides, and we will be doing that after for sure. And I'm going to just talk briefly now about some of the available resources for supporting these kinds of programs. As Sarah mentioned, it does take some financial contributions. So let me just, let's see. Okay. Great. So I think, how do I go backwards? Sorry, there we go. Okay, so just want to talk a little bit about opportunities for funding. For those of you who are school district employees, you're probably quite familiar with the various federal COVID relief packages that have included significant funding for public schools. So often referred to as the ESSER funds, which stands for Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds. The first round of which passed several months ago, early on in COVID. That was $194 million for Massachusetts districts. There was a second round, which was another $738 million. And finally, we're in this sort of third round of the ESSER funds, which were included in the American Rescue Act, American Rescue Plan Act. And that was an additional $1.6 billion direct to school districts that needs to be allocated by September 30th, 2024. So not really long-term funding here, but something available over the next few years. And this is really an unprecedented level of funding for school districts. And the purpose of, as stated for this third round of funding, is really to support the safe reopening and sustaining safe operations of schools while meeting students' academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs resulting from the COVID-19 pandemic. So we could go into a lot more detail about, what's allowable or not allowable, but if you want to really dive into sort of the program overview, understand what the allocation was for your school district or community, and also see the application instructions for receiving the funds. I have included in here the link to the Mass Department of Elementary and Secondary Ed website with the specific link for these ESSER funds. And we're going to talk a little bit about what the alignment is with school gardens or outdoor learning and the intended use of these funds. And I also just want to mention that in these federal COVID relief funds, there's been money directed specifically to schools, but then there's also a tremendous amount of funds directed to municipalities as well. So Massachusetts in this, the American Rescue Plan Act received an additional $3.4 billion that's being provided directly to municipalities. And there's, different sort of guidance about how those funds are meant to be used, but they can be used for schools as well. And so just wanted to sort of flag that as another potential source for both for things like school gardens, but also for broader food systems efforts that might support your farm to school program. So the Massachusetts Food System Collaborative has put together a great resource document about how communities might think about allocating some of those funds. They are in a similar timeline in terms of being spent over the next couple of years. And again, if you want to sort of dig into the all the different pots of money that Massachusetts has received, I did put in a link for the Massachusetts, the website where you can sort of see all of those different funding pools. But we're going to specifically today be talking about the ESSER funds. And I think I wish I could say like, this is how decisions are being made about this, but it really is different in every community. So part of the one thing that is common across all communities is that there really is supposed to be public input in this process. So there should be a way, whether you are a school staff person or not, to understand how some of the decisions are being made and have an opportunity to share your input. But the actual decision-making process is going to look different in terms of who's involved in different communities. And obviously, the ESSER funds really being controlled much more by folks within the school system, and then the municipal funds often living a bit more in municipal staff like a mayor's office or something like that. Again, feel free to put questions in the chat as we're going through this. And I also want to say, like, the guidance and information about this continues to evolve. So trying to provide as much updated info as we can, but really recognize I'm definitely not an expert on it, and there continues to be new information too. So we'll be trying to update resources as much as we can as we get any new information. But really want to flag what the US Department of Education has said as like 3 priority goals for those who are making decisions about how to use the ESSER funds. They've identified creating health and safe learning environments, addressing lost instructional time, and supporting staff and educator stability and well-being. So really think that gardens and outdoor learning experiences are an excellent way to address these 3 priorities and fall well within the allowable uses for these funds. And as schools are developing their plans for how to use their ESSER funds, they do need to incorporate evidence-based strategies. And fortunately, there's a lot of great evidence that's already been compiled for you as you or others in your district may be putting together these plans. So in particular, one that has been developed by the North American Association for Environmental, and that's what's linked here. And Lisa, maybe you can drop the link right into the chat itself, but this is an incredible, it's actually a whole Google folder of like several different documents that provides specific examples of some funding uses. It even offers like sample budgets of how you might justify what it would cost to do the particular strategy. And then also literature that provides the evidence base for each strategy, so that these are things you would be really easily able to adapt into your district's own ESSER plan. So just a few thoughts on the type of strategies that might really align. Doing things like designing and building more permanent outdoor classroom space. We've seen tremendous use of tents and other emergency structures for how to get kids outside and maybe protected from a little bit of weather. But those are not necessarily permanent or long-term solutions. So thinking about what could it look like, even something as simple as this example, which is from a Boston Public Schools, that these are just logs really that are creating space for students to be outside. But what could it take to have spaces that you can plan to use beyond just the pandemic that as outdoor classroom space? So potentially installing new or updating existing school gardens. Sarah, I loved the photo you included of the accessible garden bed, because I think that's also a really important thing to be focusing on, is how are you creating these spaces that are inclusive of your full student population? So maybe you did have a garden that was not as accessible to some students, and this could be an opportunity to expand it or build out new spaces or sort of retrofit things so that it really welcomes all students. And then of course, providing professional learning for teachers so that you aren't just building these structures, but you're really supporting your staff to be able to use them effectively, feel comfortable in them, and really have the skills and confidence to make them successful spaces. And we're not going to go into any depth here, but I think I would be remiss if I didn't mention that these funds can also support school nutrition program connections or innovation in the school nutrition department as well. We know how important having access to healthy food is for students to be able to succeed at school. That's a really important part of them being welcome back this fall and really ready to learn. And so we will be doing additional sessions, as I said, sort of focus more on the school nutrition side of things, but especially for those of you who are administrators, just want to flag that there are also opportunities for thinking about using some of these funds for the school nutrition program as well. And just want to highlight a couple additional resources for how you might kind of dig in more to some of these topics. As I mentioned, encourage you to stay engaged with Mass Farm School. Best way to learn about any upcoming webinars is to subscribe to our e-newsletter. So you can do that on our website. There's a really excellent organization called the School Garden Support Organization Network, which has really frequent webinars, incredible best practices, like an online forum for talking to other individuals involved in school gardens. That's a great sort of one-stop place for lots of resources on school gardens. As I said, the North American Association for Environmental Education has really been putting forth a lot of great resources around use of the current ESSER funds to support environmental education and outdoor learning. Also connections to like the Massachusetts chapter if you're interested in getting involved in that kind of advocacy locally. And then also mention the Green Schoolyards America, which really early in the pandemic was a partner in launching something called the National COVID-19 Outdoor Learning Initiative, which similarly has a lot of strategies and case studies and incredible examples of how schools are making this transition successfully to incorporating more outdoor learning, and initially a real focus on doing so as a response to COVID, and I think really looking at, well, how do we sustain this going forward, not just as a response to the pandemic. And they're having bi-weekly like community of practice gatherings. If you want to talk to other peers, that's a great place to get started. And finally, just want to encourage you to stay in touch and reach out as you have individual questions or really interested in how you can bring some of these activities to your school or your community. And we do have a few minutes left, so I'm going to stop my share, see if there are any questions in the chat to respond to, or if there are people who have to, who want to take their themselves off of mute, feel free to talk. So there's a question about the kinds of garden tools necessary for starting or maintaining a school garden. And I think to briefly respond that's really going to depend on what you're actually doing in the space. But there's that school garden support organization website I mentioned has some really great resources on things like supplies and materials. And I don't know if Sarah or Sheila, you want to respond to this about what you got started with when you were just any like essential tools as you're just getting started.
I can talk about that. I mean, the things we have enough for a class of trowels, and then we have sort of a half class rubber buckets, are really nice for people who are, weeding, and a hose. The hose, we're still trying to find a perfect setup for the hose. Right now, we put it in a garden cart. That was something that we really ended up really needing, was a garden, like a sturdy garden cart to haul stuff out of the garden if we needed to. And currently we just round up the hose in there, but I think that's our sort of next purchase is a wheelie hose holder, which I think would be really helpful. Certainly rakes and little weeders are things that have been very handy.
Great.
And I'll just add on the other side, we don't have a full class of anything. So we share off our stuff, and it's trowels, it's little things that the kids use for the most part. We did do rain barrels. Ipswich has a water issue always at the end of the Ipswich River. So we water off from rain barrels almost exclusively.
Awesome. Any other questions? We will be sharing the slides as somebody has asked.
I have a question come into me, and it was just about, it was from a parent volunteer asking for advice on how to advocate successfully for funding to garden program to maybe sustain staffing, recognizing the limitations of parent and family volunteers in maintaining a program long-term, and just looking for some advice from any of the speakers about how to successfully advocate more funding going to the program in their district.
So I can take that one. Ipswich has been really interesting in their approaches. So we also started out with a parent group that was very, felt strongly about that value. And they went to the greenhouses and the farms and said, they were the ones that started with saying, can you give us seeds? Can you give us whatever? Can you give us a little lumber? Can you give us something? And at the same time, we created a group of students, we call them the Green Team. And those Green Team students are kind of our environmental stewards, and they have a great interest. And so that's run by a teacher and some parent volunteers. And that now has gone so many years that they're all the way up into the high school. And the high school group of kids then went to the senior citizens, and they created a senior garden. So I think that if you don't start huge, start small. And if it's a value in your community, I think it starts to roll over, but get kids involved at the same time that you're doing the advocacy for what you would like them to do. And you'll find proponents within the school staff somewhere. You know, there are people that have passions for that.
Great. Well, we are at right at time, so I think we're going to have to close out. I hope that this has been, you know, really a start for a lot of people. We are interested in continuing this conversation and really tailoring our offerings in the future to those topics that you're most interested in learning about. So we've dropped a brief like a link to a really brief exit survey in the chat. Would love it if you would fill that out and just share your thoughts about other topics that you'd like to learn about. We will be sharing out the slides and links that were provided in the chat. Excuse me. Thank you so much to Sheila and Sarah for sharing your experiences. And for those of you working in schools in particular, I want to thank you for all of your incredible dedication over a very challenging almost 2 years now, and hope you are enjoying the summer, and wish you lots of luck in welcoming back your students this fall. So thank everyone so much for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of the day. Bye.